Well, we welcome you to this live recording. My name is Brother Sean and I'm a member of the Teo community of Interfaith Franciscans. And our topic this evening is looking at the life of Francis of Assisi. And this will be part 4 of our recordings. I would like to show you, if I may, a picture, an icon of Francis of Assisi, if you can see that okay. So this is the man I'll be talking about, and he has an interesting pedigree. And just to recapture what we shared, or backtrack as they say, to Monday, Francis of Assisi, one of the most popular saints and patron saint of ecology. He remains an enigma. He was born into a wealthy family but gave it all up when he felt called by God to live a life of extreme poverty. And today, all these centuries on, there are many men and women following in his footsteps. So we read, framing Francis. How do you frame this man? Separating the man from the myths and distinguishing between the rhetoric and reality about Francis remain major challenges. But as Chesterton emphasizes, although there is a mass of legends and anecdotes about St. Francis of Assisi, nobody but a fool could fail to realize that Francis of Assisi was a very real historical human being. Francis had been framed in many different ways and has meant different things to different people. Cron points out that Rembrandt painted him, Zeffirelli filmed him, Chesterton eulogized him, and Lennon dies with his name on his lips. Toynbee compared him to Jesus and Buddha. And that's interesting, how he should be compared to the Lord Buddha. Kerouac picked him as a patron of the Beat generation, and Sir Kenneth Clarke called him Europe's greatest religious genius. He was and is loved and admired by many because of the simplicity of his lifestyle, his faithfulness to the call of God, his love of God and of his fellow people, his non-violence and his love of nature. He was able to interact effectively with all sorts of people, and he continues to have a universal appeal to people of all backgrounds and religions. Perhaps his strongest qualities were his dedication to God and his integrity. Spoto concludes that the most challenging aspect of Francis of Assisi is the utter seriousness of his life. Francis was one of that rare breed of people, like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Martin Luther King, and Desmond Tutu, who have been used by God in very special ways, in serving the poor and the needy. Wow. Making peace and bringing reconciliation, healing the sick and challenging received wisdoms about such things as status, wealth, and power. He holds a special place in church history because of the ways in which he challenged the established church from within. Dennis refers to Francis as the first Protestant because of his reform from within the body of the church. To the church's ostentation, inattention to the poor, neglect of pastoral responsibilities, complicity in the violence of the state, and general situation of decline, the emerging Franciscan movement offered a strong condemnation and a corrective. Hall describes Francis as the last Christian because no one after him worked as strenuously against the forces of modernity as he did, with his body, with his very life. Even though he is an important figure from history, Francis still speaks to us today through his life and his works. He has much to teach the wider church today. Crone underlines that the fact that Francis was a Catholic, an evangelical street preacher, a radical social activist, a contemplative who devoted hours to prayer, a mystic who had direct encounters with God, and someone who worshipped with all the enthusiasm and spontaneity of a Pentecostal and interfaith. He was a wonderful integration of all the theological streams we have today. All the evidence suggests and demonstrates that Francis was an enigma. He was by all accounts a simple man, but a complex character. Francis was born into a family life of wealth and privilege, yet he chose a life of extreme poverty and simplicity. That's the fact. He walked away from a promising career in his father's successful cloth company and became noted for his asceticism, dislike of possessions, and total dependence on God to provide for all his needs. His early life was defined by hedonism and a carefree attitude to everything, yet he grew up into a person of enormous religious conviction and spiritual focus. He was largely uneducated, yet he became an effective and influential preacher and teacher with the simple but powerful message of the gospel of the Christ. As an adult, he preferred his own company and a solitary lifestyle. Yet he developed a large brotherhood and built an enduring religious order and movement. He was noted for his humility and sincerity. Yet for a period he was leader of the order. He was so kind to others, but so hard on himself, and that's often the way with founders. His spiritual preference was towards prayer and contemplation. Yet he dedicated his adult life to service and action. He was concerned about the spiritual state of the church, yet he never left it and always respected the authority, especially its leaders, and in particular the Pope. He was highly effective and successful in gathering people around him, but also very single-minded and isolated within himself. He was so poor in material terms, yet so rich in spiritual terms. This book seeks to set Francis the Enigma into context and to uncover what lessons you and I can learn today from his life and his work. In chapter 1 we look at his family background and early life, and in chapter 2 we examine what he believed to be his destiny as a knight. The major turning point in his life, the start of his powerful spiritual awakening, is explored in chapter 3. A series of chapters follow which outline the major themes in his life, which effectively made him the man he was and gave rise to his reputation as a spiritual giant. These deal in turn with his spirituality. Chapter 4, his approach to poverty and simplicity. In chapter 5, the ways in which he built a religious community and orders for men and women. His great love of nature and his powerful drive to engage in mission through preaching and evangelism in chapters 9. The closing chapter, chapter 10, describes his final days, death and canonization. So we come to his beginnings. Our lives are shaped by our upbringing, and to understand who Francis was and why what he did was so special, we need to understand something of his family background and his early life. Francis was born in 1182 into a life of wealth and privilege. And like many of his peers, he was expected as an adult to take over the family business and cement the family's growing social standing and reputation. And about his family, his father was Peter Bernardone, or Pietro de Bernardone, was a self-made man who built up a business as a cloth merchant. By the early 1180s, he was successful and prosperous, one of Assisi's wealthiest merchants, and he was clearly enjoying the fruits of his labours. He was married, one assumes happily, to an attractive and supporting wife called Pisa. He lived in a fine house near the centre of town, had a good income and very comfortable lifestyle, and was well known in and around Assisi. As his business prospered, he thought pasture land and orchards around Assisi, he bought pasture land and orchards around Assisi and developed a broad portfolio of his investments. Life was treating him well, and he was surrounded by the trappings of success, thanks to his own hard work and his good business sense. Like most others who would do, he expected his family to work in the family business. Like mine did with me. There were family pork butchers for 100 years, and they expected me, the eldest son, to step in and take after my father. I didn't. I became a monk. And it was taken for granted that through time his eldest son would inherit and run it, and that was Francis. He employed many local men and was fast becoming a pillar in the local society. Chesterton described him as a substantial citizen of the Guild of Cloth Merchants, and another biographer describes him as a good, honest, strenuous cloth merchant, commonplace and vulgar in his values, was a man who measured all his success with his merchant's yardstick and gloried in the wealth, fine clothes, and social opportunity which he could give his sons. Peter was one of the most successful of a growing number of middle-class entrepreneurs in Assisi at that time. He was much more than just a successful businessman. He was a prominent citizen and harbored ambitions to become a local political leader. The circle in which he moved included the great and the good of Assisi. He was very much a man of his times. in that wealth could now bring power in the emerging capitalist economy of medieval Europe. A stronghold of the Catholic Church on politics and people's lives was declining, even though church-going still remained very strong. The Bernardone business was built on the growing desire of other middle-class families to display their status and wealth through fine clothes and fabrics. This was new money. As a recent biographer has noted, he sold to the few who could afford them the colourful brocaded cloaks, vests, furred hats, gold collars, and grey stocking caps that were sewn in his workshop. And he managed to dominate the Assisi market in decorative fabrics, damasks, velvets, furs, and cloths of gold and silver for fine apparel. Building a successful business around required Peter to travel a great deal. Several times each year, when the weather allowed, he joined trade caravans travelling to France to buy new stock. His customers wanted and were prepared to pay for the best quality and the most fashionable fabrics. He regularly visited the large cloth markets and textile fairs in French cities like Toulouse, Montpellier, Burgundy, and further afield in Flanders, in modern-day Holland. He was often gone for months at a time. Peter had married Pisa sometime around 1180. It was Pisa's second marriage, her first husband, by whom she had a son named Angelo, born in 1179, having died. She is often referred to as Lady Pisa because she came from a noble family in Provence in France. She was a long way from home in her new life in Assisi, but she fitted in well. Peter had probably met her and won her heart during one of his business trips to France, and brought her to Assisi to be his partner. By all accounts, Pisa was beautiful, mild-mannered, and had good taste. Little is known about her other than she had a strong religious faith, was blessed with a beautiful singing voice, and loved to sing her favourite French ballads. No contemporary accounts survive of what Peter and Pisa looked like, but a recent life-size statue of them in a small square outside Chiesa Nuova portray them as a youthful, healthy, attractive, and wealthily dressed in fine clothes and adorned with the sort of jewellery one might expect people of status to have had in those days. Peter is shown as a confident and imposing man, and Pisa is shown holding broken chains. We know little else about Peter and Pisa, nor about Angelo. History tells us nothing whether or how the Bernardone business developed further, whether Peter's political ambitions were realized, whether there were any more children after Francis, and what happened to Angelo, or whether Peter and Pisa lived to old age. Peter reappears in Francis' story in 1206, in an incident that shaped the rest of Francis' life, but was 1,000,000 miles away from comfortable future that Peter had envisaged for his son. The Bernadones lived in a fine house above the cloth shop, near the busy Piazza del Comune, in the heart of Assisi. Typical houses of middle-class families in those days had 5 or 6 rooms and a tall stone tower to provide defense in time of need, but more importantly, to serve as a conspicuous sign of success. Such houses in those days were sparsely furnished by today's standards. The Bernardone dwelling probably had a few simple, undecorated wooden chairs, benches, and storage chests, and of course a bed. Rooms were dark because windows were few and small, with shutters rather than glass, and buildings were packed in tight, allowing little sunlight to reach ground level. Houses had simple kitchens and food was cooked on small open fireplaces. Privacy was a luxury few could afford, and sensitivities were different to today. There were no bathrooms as such, and toilets were in outhouses, in open courtyards between buildings. Interesting. The remains of what is believed to have been the Bernadone's residence and shop can still be seen on the Viciola Superiore di San Antonio beneath the Baroque walls of the Chiesa Nuova. Chiesa Nuova, which means literally new church, was built in the 17th century as a place of pilgrimage for people interested in the life of Francis, who lived here with his parents until the age of 20. The church is relatively small, neatly decorated, and quite atmospheric. Parts of the original house remain beneath it, including what is reported to be the entrance door, along with part of the shop where Francis helped his father. The cell where his father later imprisoned him can be seen inside what is now the church. The scale of the surviving parts of the Bernardone building suggests a wealthy family, and the location close to the main town centre square, Piazza Comune, suggests social status and a prominent role in commercial life of Assisi. Here Peter stored many fine fabrics he brought back from his travels. It is also likely that cloth was dyed here, so the place would have had a number of employees hard at work in hot, dark, cramped, and decidedly unhealthy conditions. Early in 1182, when fair weather returned after a long, harsh winter, Peter set off on one of his regular trade missions to France. Before he returned home, Pizia had given birth to their first child, a boy, in January or February 1182. Angelo, now 3 years old, had a half-brother. A few writers, but neither Celano nor Bonaventure, have reported that a short while before the end of Pizia's pregnancy, a stranger arrived unannounced at the Bernardone house and told her that the son she was about to give birth to would be very special, and that he should be born in a stable just as Mary had given birth to Jesus in a stable. The story goes that Pizia's faith made her trust the prophecy, so she moved into the small stable besides the family home where the boy was born. That place is now the tiny stone arched oratory of San Francesco Piccolina, or La Stelletta, a quiet, unassuming place where locals, particularly pregnant women, often go to pray. The story of the stable provides a bridge between the worlds of this baby boy, born in central Italy in medieval times, and the birth of Jesus in a stable in the Holy Land 1,000 years earlier. As Franciscan pilgrimage leader Roch Neimer puts it, as Christ was born in a stable in Bethlehem, so Francis will be born in a stable in Assisi. This speaks to the whole purpose of Francis' life, which was to walk in the footsteps of Jesus Christ as closely as possible. Such links with Jesus would be a recurring theme through the rest of Francis' days, and they were certainly strongly emphasized and possibly at times heavily embroidered by his followers and his supporters. They gave an early clue to the relatively unique life of this man, and to provided colourful context for the many biographers who have written about him over the years. But the stable story needs to be treated with caution, because many believe it to be a legend probably started by supporters who wanted to make it look as though his life resembled that of Jesus. Interestingly, the stable story is not mentioned by either Solano or Bonaventure. A sign over the entrance of the chapel, believed to have been carved in stone between 1316 and 1354, tells in Italian of how this chapel was a stable for ox and ass, in which was born St. Francis, St. Francis, wonder of the world. The site has attracted pilgrims since the 13th century. However, it seems quite plausible and possible, if not likely, that Francis had a rather more mundane start in life in the comfort of his parents' house nearby. A few days after the birth of her son Pythia, took him to be baptized in church, following the custom of the day and in accordance with our own strong Christian belief, and for sensible practical reasons, because infant death was so common in those days. Tragic, isn't it, when you think? The baptism ceremony was held in the nearby cathedral of San Rufino, which was still under construction at the time. It had been then served as Assisi's cathedral for over a century and a half, and was completed in 1253. Today it has a Romanesque facade dominated by a large rose window and a simple interior, which was altered in the 16th century. When structural repairs were carried out, it still contains the font used in Francis' baptism. The cathedral sits in the Piazza of San Rufino, up the steep and winding Via San Rufino, which runs up from the main square, Piazza Comune. And trust me, I've been there, and it is an amazing experience. An amazing experience to be in a place with such a humble man, who didn't seek out to establish an order of Franciscan monks. No, that wasn't his intention. His intention was to carry on doing what his heart told him to do as an individual, to reach out to the poor, the leper. But his insatiable love of God, the Supreme, drew him even closer, beyond being a contemplative, to that of a mystic. And his love affair with God and his Son the Christ was so intense that in the church at San Damiano he was given the stigmata of Christ and bore those marks and suffered excruciating pain. But he's a man of vision, and today he touches many hearts and many lives. He's touched mine, because my God is not in a cathedral or in an ornate church. My God is in nature, in every blade of grass, in every rose petal, in every flower, even in the animals. And right behind me I have 3 who are snoring their little heart out. Clemmy has just surfaced. That's where my God is. My God is very much around the animal kingdom. Peace, solitude, silence, stillness. But of course my ministry today is online, because I no longer travel the world running retreats or quiet days or seminars or courses. Everything is done here, and it can be quite mundane. The same thing, but on a different day. So Francesco's spiritual ecology for me encompasses an environmental ecology, living in harmony with creation, Mother Nature, and the elements. It's a social ecology, embracing all people as brothers and sisters, regardless of color, race, or status. It's a spiritual ecology, in praise of the Father, Mother, God Supreme as creator of all things. And it's an interfaith ecology, inviting all soul seekers of truth enter a new concept of living practical spirituality in the modern world, regardless of one's religious persuasions. So I wish you, my brothers and sisters, a peaceful night, and I thank you from my heart for allowing me share with you the beginnings of this amazing man's journey in finding his God, in finding a blueprint that was to live on in the hearts of minds of modern man.